So welcome to Case Western Reserve University School of Law's Case Downtown program. I know a lot of you have been to these programs before. We do them once a month where we bring one of our faculty members down to the City Club, and it is our effort to bring the law school to the downtown community. I am remiss that I didn't start by saying, if you don't know me, I'm Michael Scharf. I'm the co-dean of the law school, and we are very fortunate at our school to have one of the best faculty of any law school in the country. In fact, the CISC study that ranks faculties based on their scholarly impact has ranked our law school faculty number 25 in the country out of the 210 law schools, which is really a big deal for both recruiting and our prestige value, and it makes our alumni happy. It's really what people come to law school for, is to study from great faculty. Well, today you guys get to hear a presentation from one of our very best and most popular faculty. Sharona Hoffman is someone who has won our Faculty Teaching Award of the Year. She is somebody who has published in some of the best journals and is a well-known scholar in the health law area. Our Health Law Center, which she is the co-director of, is ranked number 9 in the country. And it is celebrating its, I think, 52nd birthday. It was the first health law center in the country, and it really began the field of health law. It is appropriate, therefore, that Sharona has written her first book about an issue that transcends just law, but is something that is relevant for all of us. And I know a lot of the people in this room are hitting around 50 or above. This is a time when we're all thinking about planning for our elderly years. And a lot of people don't plan for the elderly years, and then they get stuck with a lot of financial and other hardships that they could have avoided if they'd only thought ahead. Well, Sharona has done a lot of thinking ahead, and she's put her insights and her research into this wonderful book, Aging with a Plan. Now, the book is available if you want to get her to sign it and buy it and take it home outside at a heavily discounted price. So it's going for, what do we say, $29, which is about $20 less than you get when you buy it in the book.
The list price is
$37, so about $9 less. Still, really good deal. And I encourage you all, if you are enjoying her insights, to learn more about them from getting the book. Anyway, without further ado, it is my great pleasure to present and welcome Sharona Hoffman.
Well, thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here this morning and talk about something that is near and dear to my heart, this book that I wrote. So I thought that I would start by telling you a little bit about why I wrote the book, and then give you some background information, and then drill down into a couple of the topics that have legal implications. So the book actually grew out of a very difficult period in my life. In 2013 and 2014, both of my parents died, my mother-in-law died, and my husband Andy was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease at the age of 55. So as I was going through all of this, I was learning a lot about the legal and social and medical and financial and other challenges of getting older and getting sick and ultimately facing death. Now, I am a professor of law and bioethics, so I knew something about the doctrine and theory of a lot of these issues, but there's nothing like personal experience to enliven your knowledge and really drive these lessons home. In the midst of all of this, in July of 2014, I faced a big birthday. I turned 50. And so I thought it was probably time to start thinking about my own aging. And as much as things were very difficult for our parents, I knew that they might be even harder for Andy and for me because we don't have children. We don't have anyone who's going to drop everything and rush to our aid when we need it. So life has taught me that it's pretty unpredictable, that as much as I'd like to control everything, and I do, I can't. It is full of surprises, and some of them are pretty unpleasant. Nevertheless, there is a lot to be gained from thinking ahead and planning ahead and trying to put some safeguards in place. So the book, first of all, is my effort to deal with some of my own anxieties, which can be considerable. But more importantly, it's an effort to put my personal and professional experience to good use and to help others. So there are a lot of books out there about aging. I can't claim to have come upon an original topic, which academics like to do, but I do think this book is somewhat different. First of all, it's a one-stop shopping opportunity. It doesn't focus just on the law or on finances or on medicine. It really hits all of the issues that I found to be critical. Also, it is not just targeted at people who are already elderly or doing the day-to-day work of caregiving. It's also targeted at people who are middle-aged, who will face these challenges in the future, but who really should be thinking ahead and learning about these issues. Because, as I've found, if you are in the midst of crisis, it's very difficult to make good decisions if you don't know anything about the challenges that you are facing. So the book is pretty short. I tried to make it concise but comprehensive. I do talk a lot about research and studies, but I also have checklists and a whole bunch of practical advice and a lot of personal anecdotes because I had a lot to work with. So hopefully it's a pretty easy read. So I'm going to go over now the different topics in the book briefly, and then we'll talk about two of them. Okay. So I start with a chapter about money because money is involved with all of these challenges. So what retirement expenses can you anticipate? And even if you are very well insured, you're going to have a lot of out-of-pocket medical expenses. Medicare and insurance doesn't cover everything. And of course, then there are living expenses, long-term care expenses, and so on. So how do you go about saving for retirement? And what do you need to know about particular financial products, such as long-term care insurance or reverse mortgages, which are heavily advertised, but it turns out they are very complicated products and you really need to know a lot about them before making a decision. So this chapter deals with all of that. The benefits of community living. So we hear a lot about aging in place, about staying in the home that you love, that you've lived in for decades, that allows you to maintain your independence. And that can be great. It can be great if you will be able to remain socially active, if you can still go out into the community, do things, if people will come visit you, if people will check on you to make sure the home is safe. If you have stairs in the house, it may not be. So a theme that runs throughout the book is the importance of social interaction throughout life. People who are socially active are shown to have better mental and physical health and also longevity. And by contrast, people who are lonely, there's a very clear association with physical problems such as cardiovascular problems, insomnia, higher blood pressure. So it's very important to remain socially active, to continue to feel that your life matters to others and that it's meaningful and purposeful. So for some people, moving to a retirement community or to some other setting that allows for more social opportunities is the right thing to do. So that chapter talks about all of that. Now, what happens if you're like me and you're not going to have unpaid caregivers that can help you with money and medical care and things around the home? So this chapter talks about some emerging service industries, daily money managers, geriatric care managers, home organizers, and others. So what do you need to know about these service professionals and how do you go about hiring them? Essential legal planning, that is one of the topics that we'll cover in more detail. How many people here are elder law attorneys or do a lot of elder law work? Okay, just one, so good. The rest of you are going to learn a whole lot. No, you'll learn a lot as well. Um, Driving while elderly. I'll talk more about that as well because it has legal implications. Then I have a chapter on medical care. Care coordination, treating the patient, not just diseases. So in this country, we run to specialists a lot. And in Cleveland, you can get great care from specialists at the Cleveland Clinic, at university hospitals. But the problem is that your care can become fragmented, that you might be in a situation where nobody is overseeing your care. So you get drug-drug interactions. You get one condition treated very, very aggressively, but it's to the detriment of other conditions. You develop other problems, or your cognitive capacities deteriorate. And so it's very important to have care coordination, to have oversight over your care. And this chapter talks about how do you become a member of your own medical team? How do you learn to ask the right questions? How do you learn to advocate for yourself and to build appropriate support networks? So I've given a talk about the medical care aspects to other audiences, but I thought today we should focus on the legal aspects because it's a CLE program. Long-term care. So this is nursing homes, assisted living, in-home care. What do you need to know about these options, and how do you make good decisions about them? And finally, exit strategies, maintaining control at the end of life. So this last chapter is about end-of-life decision-making. What do you need to know about different options? Palliative care, hospice, do not resuscitate orders. What kinds of conversations do you need to have with your loved ones about your end-of-life preferences? Do you want to prioritize length of life? Do you want everything done no matter what? Or do you want to prioritize quality of life and maybe have limited care in certain circumstances? How do you figure out your own priorities and your own values and maybe your own religious beliefs? So we'll talk a little bit about that when we talk about advanced directives, but that's the last chapter, end-of-life decision-making. All right, so those are the topics. And now I have a slide with some facts and figures. So in 2012, we had 43 million people who were 65 and older, and that was 13% of the population. We also had 5.9 people who were the very elderly, 85 and older. It's predicted that by 2030, we will have 72 million seniors, and that will be 20% of the population. And then it will plateau. It will not continue to grow. So why are we going to have this jump from 13 to 20%? Well, because of the baby boomers. The baby boomers began turning 65 in 2011. Baby boomers are defined as those born between 1946 and 1964. And I was very upset to see that 1964 figure. I thought I was Generation X or Y or one of those generations. I'm the very last year of the baby boomers, so now I have to say we baby boomers. By 2050, we will have 19 million people who are 85 and older. Life expectancy in 2012 was 76.4 years for males and 81.2 years for females. But it turns out that if you have reached the age of 65, your life expectancy is actually quite a bit higher, because you have survived the hazards of infancy and childhood and being a teenager and so on. So everyone in this room has decades and decades ahead. Alzheimer's, we have to talk about that for a second. In 2012, 5.4 million people were living with an Alzheimer's disease diagnosis, And of course, Alzheimer's is just one type of dementia, so many, many other people live with other types of dementia. And this is a possibility that you absolutely have to take into account when you plan for yourself or for your loved ones. And this is of particular interest to me. The childless in 2012, 16.1% of women between the ages of 40 and 50 had not had a child. So it's not an insignificant part of the population. Okay, so we'll start with driving. Driving was a very sensitive topic in my family. I'm sure it is in others. So I had relatives who had multiple car accidents, did things like drive into fire hydrants that got in their way, and nothing really happened. They were given tickets and told to be more careful and sent on their way. Now, there were never any injuries, thank goodness, but in one case, a few months before her death, an elderly relative had a fender bender. She was inching out of Walgreens and she hit another car. And the police came, no injuries reported at the scene. It wasn't even a bender. She had a few scratches on her car. And so the family thought nothing of it. But after she died, the family received a complaint. The driver in the other car claimed that she had suffered massive injuries, that she had undergone neck surgery, which she apparently did, but very unlikely from this car accident. And yet the family had to deal with this. It was a lot of stress. They couldn't distribute the assets because now they had a lawsuit and a creditor. It caused a lot of anxiety. Months and months later, it was finally settled. The insurance company paid, so no out-of-pocket expenses, but a lot of headaches that they didn't need at a very difficult time. So how do you deal with these driving issues, and how do you have conversations about them without being told what I used to hear, which is, I will never speak to you again, I'm writing you out of my will, I'm moving to another place and not telling you where. So these can become very inflamed conversations. So right now we have 36 million drivers who are 65 and older. In 2012, 4,079 people, 70 and older, died in car accidents. So I don't know if you think that's a high number or a low number. The fatalities are usually for the elderly driver and the elderly passengers in the car. So it's usually not the people in the other car. Why? Because elderly drivers are more frail, and so they tend not to survive if they're badly injured. Now, one reason that number isn't higher is because older drivers do engage in some self-regulation. So they drive less at night, they drive less on highways, they usually don't drive drunk. So that's good news. But there is relatively little state regulation. In some states, you have more frequent renewals, you have to come in person to renew, and they'll add a vision test maybe. But often, that doesn't really help. My mother-in-law, at the age of 92 in Massachusetts, went to renew her driver's license with a walker. Now, we were pretty sure that the walker would clue them in that she shouldn't be driving because her legs didn't work properly. She couldn't press on the brakes quickly, probably. But no, she came in person and she passed the vision test, and so they happily gave her a driver's license and sent her on her way with the walker to drive back home. She didn't get into any car accidents, but we were quite startled by this. So only DC and Nevada, last time I checked, required medical certification from your doctor if you were 75 or older, and only Illinois required a road test for people 75 and older. Now, one reason there isn't more regulation is because there isn't good empirical evidence as to what kind of interventions are most effective. And that might be, they have done some studies, but they're inconclusive. But that might be because older drivers often will have good days and bad days. And sometimes they take medication that clouds their judgment, and sometimes they don't. So if they go to take their road test on a good day, they'll pass, but that doesn't mean that they're necessarily safe drivers all the time. So it's a bit of a struggle to figure out what to do. It's a big deal to give up your driver's license because in this country we don't have a good infrastructure in most places. There is inadequate public transportation and there aren't a lot of services to help the elderly get around. And so giving up your driver's license can mean losing independence and losing social opportunities. And I just read this weekend, somebody sent me a study that showed that people who gave up their driver's license actually experienced some deterioration. They experienced more loneliness, more depression, and more physical problems. So I don't mean to trivialize this. It is a very, very important issue. Now, why are unsafe drivers not taken off the roads by state authorities? That's because there is no structured reporting requirements in most states. So I'll take questions later, so hold the thought. Your doctors don't have to report if they suspect that you're an unsafe driver, and most of them don't want to report because that will not help their doctor-patient relationship. You won't appreciate it. Family members don't have to report, and in fact, there isn't really a mechanism for family members to report. There's nowhere that they can send their complaints. And fewer than half the states train police officers to report at-risk drivers, which is why people can have multiple car accidents and there's no follow-up, there's no investigation. Show me your medication list, should you be driving, let's do a road test, etc. That doesn't happen. And so it's really up to families to intervene individually with elderly drivers who might be at risk. And so here's some advice that is gathered from the AARP and AAA and other sources. So what do? You take your life into your own hands and you actually get in the car with the elderly driver and drive around with them on several occasions so you can observe their driving. And then you discuss concrete driving problems. You don't accuse them or just talk abstractly about you shouldn't be driving anymore. You have more success if you say, you know, you missed a couple of stop signs, or you had trouble with that left turn, or you didn't signal appropriately. And you have to expect to have several conversations. One won't do it. You need to emphasize that you are talking about this topic because you care about the person, you're worried about them, you don't want them to get hurt or to hurt somebody else and then have to live with the guilt of having done that. There are places around the city that will do driving assessments. If you can get the elderly person to actually agree to go get assessed, I think university hospitals, Cleveland Clinic, the VA, will do a driving assessment and will tell you whether there are problems or not. So that is a very good approach. You should also brainstorm options. Maybe what it will take is simply a little bit more self-regulation. Just drive to familiar places. Just drive when the weather is okay. Or maybe there are people that you can hire to drive the person around for a few hours a week. There are people who are willing to do that for a modest fee. Or maybe your church or your synagogue has volunteers that are happy to drive your loved ones when they need to be driven. So all sorts of options might be available. And there is some hope for the future, and this already exists. There are all sorts of technologies that can allow people to drive more safely for a longer period of time. So we have warning systems, we have rear view cameras, we have other cameras, and they've done studies, and they say that that really helps people drive more safely, and in the future we might have autonomous cars where the driver has to actually do very little. The car basically drives itself. All right, so I think that's it for driving. And now let's talk about legal preparedness. So, are we good with legal planning in this country? And the answer, of course, is no. So, 41% of baby boomers do not have wills. And this includes people who are highly educated and really with it. I've been very surprised as I've gone and talked about these issues. Even good friends who are educated, who are 70 and older, who have very serious health problems, ask me, do you really think I should bother to write a will? I'm just not sure I have time for that. The answer is yes, and we'll talk about why in a minute. There's another important type of document, advance directives, which we'll talk about. Only 18 to 36% of adults have those. So we are not very responsible about legal planning. What do you need to have? It's a long list. You need to have a will. If you don't have a will, state law will govern how your assets are distributed, and they will go to your spouse and your children. But if you want your assets to go to other people, siblings, nieces, nephews, other loved ones, or if you want to leave your assets or part of them to charity, for example, to Case Western Reserve University School of Law, that will not happen if you don't leave written instructions in a will. If you have a lot of money, you should also consider a trust. There are a lot of advantages to a trust, one of which is you don't have to go through probate, so it's a lot easier for the people that will inherit. There's also another mechanism called transfer on death or payment on death, and here you can take assets and you can designate them to go directly to a beneficiary after your death, so they don't have to go through probate. You can do that with bank accounts, with cars, with your home. You have to go to the right place and fill out some forms to the bank, to the Department of Motor Vehicles, to the deed people downtown. But I have done that, and it gives me some peace of mind, so everybody knows what they're getting once I'm gone. And that's a good vehicle as well. Now, you don't only need to leave instructions, you also have to have a decision maker. As we said, it is possible that you will lose capacity to make your own decisions many, many years before you die, if you develop dementia, have a traumatic brain injury, or for other reasons. So you have to have people who can keep your affairs going. You have to have people who can write checks, who can make decisions about should certain assets be sold in order to pay for your medical care. So you need to have a durable power of attorney for property and finances. And you should name a decision maker and then an alternate, because it's possible that by the time you need a decision maker, the person you named as your original decision maker will herself have dementia or will have died or will somehow otherwise be unavailable. So a substitute is very useful. You don't only need to think about financial matters, you also need to think about health care. And so that's where advance directives come in, and they have several components. First of all, a living will. A living will leaves end-of-life instructions. So a living will operates when you are terminally ill, permanently unconscious, or in a vegetative state. And you can say what you would prefer. Would you want a ventilator? Would you want artificial nutrition and hydration? Do you want everything done at all costs, or do you want your care limited if you're in a vegetative state or in really, really bad shape? So you can leave those instructions, but a living will operates just at the end. So again, you need a decision maker. You need a decision maker who can make decisions long before you're close to the end of life if you lose decisional capacity. So you should name a trusted person in a durable power of attorney for health care who will be able to consent to treatment or tell the doctors, no, this person wouldn't want that, and make decisions as though the person were you. So it should be someone who is very familiar with your preferences and your philosophy. Now in Ohio, if you don't have a durable power of attorney for health care, you actually might not be able to get care. So you will get emergency care, you will get end-of-life care, but you may not get other procedures. So I sit on the ethics committee at university hospitals, and we had last year a situation where a father came in with his daughter, and he needed a procedure to remove kidney stones. He was in a lot of pain, and his doctors had ordered this procedure. So the surgeon talked to him and decided he was decisionally incapacitated. He wasn't with it. And the daughter said, yes, I know, but I consent to this treatment. He's very uncomfortable. We need to do this. And the doctors said, great, where is your durable power of attorney for health care? And she said she didn't have one. Her father hadn't done that. And the doctors refused to do the procedure. They sent this man home with his kidney stones, and they said, well, then you're going to have to go to court and get a guardian, which takes months and is an elaborate procedure. So very important to have a durable power of attorney for health care. Again, no matter how old you are, you should have this document. Anatomical gift form. If you want to be an organ donor, which is a great thing, we have a terrible shortage of organs, you need to indicate that in a legal document. It's not enough to think that in your head. Now, in Ohio, we can do that on driver's licenses. But remember, you might have given up your driver's license, or it might not be with you in an emergency. So if you have somewhere where you store your legal documents, or your attorney has your legal documents, include an anatomical gift form if you want to be an organ donor. If you have a history of mental health problems, you should also have an advance directive for mental health treatment. People who have been treated for mental health problems often have a lot of experience. They know what drugs they tolerate and don't tolerate. They know what treatments they want and don't want. So you can give very specific instructions in this advance directive. And some people also want a different decision maker for mental health than for physical health. So you have the documents, but it's not enough for you to have them. You have to make sure that the right people also have them. So your decision makers need to have copies of the documents. And your doctors and any hospital that you go to should have copies of this document so that they know who to contact for decisions and what preferences you have. So for years, every time I got a physical, my doctor would ask, do you have a living will? Do you have a durable power of attorney for health care? And I would say yes, and he would check the box and smile and move on. Well, having written this book, this year it dawned on me I should ask him, actually, do you have a copy? Do you know what I said in those documents? And he said, oh, no. So I had to come back and give him copies, and he scanned it into the electronic health record. Whether or not anyone ever finds it in the electronic health record is a different story, but at least they have it there somewhere. So a few more tips on legal preparedness. You not only have to make sure that your decision makers have your documents, you also should talk to them about them. You should make sure they understand what your preferences are, what your philosophy is, and that they're willing to follow that. So I have a good friend who is very religious, and her very elderly mother is not very religious. And she tells me that periodically during their phone conversations, the mother says to her, "Listen, I know that you are religious and that you have very strong beliefs about the sanctity of life, but please assure me that your beliefs about the sanctity of life will not hinder your ability to follow my wishes, that my care be limited in certain circumstances, such as if I have advanced dementia." And the daughter assures her, "Yes, I will follow your wishes and everything is good," but those are very important conversations to have. You also need to make sure your decision makers know what assets you have, where they can find documentation about it, and what your full financial picture is. And I learned this from something that happened to a colleague at work recently. This colleague, her elderly parents were aging at home. So they were in their 80s, they were in a home, and the mother had some dementia. The father was clear-minded, he was in a wheelchair, but he was still very independent and very private. And when the adult children asked him questions about his finances, he would tell them, "Why are you asking? It's none of your business." And so they didn't know anything. Well, one day there was a catastrophic fire in the house. The mother escaped, but she has dementia. She doesn't understand the finances. The father fell out of his wheelchair, and he was not rescued until he was badly injured, and he died a few weeks later, having never recovered consciousness. The house was in ashes. The computer was melted. There was no documentation. And months later, the adult children are still struggling to figure out what insurance policies are there, what resources are there, where's the money, how are they going to pay for their mother's health care. So this is a terrible story, and it shouldn't happen to anyone. You have to have people you trust who know your business. Provide funeral instructions. So I've had people tell me, "I don't want to burden my children. I'm just going to let them do whatever they want after I die." That is not a kindness. That is not a good approach. They are going to want detailed instructions. Hopefully, they will be very upset and traumatized when you die. So that is not a good time to start from scratch with trying to figure out what you would have wanted. Now, even with detailed instructions, they will probably find things to argue about, believe me. But the fewer things they argue about, the better. So please tell them what it is that you want done. They will appreciate it, even if it costs a bit of money. And finally, after you've created the documents, given copies, talked to your decision makers, you still can't forget about it. You have to revisit these every few years. People say every 5 years, or whenever something life-changing happens. So these are all governed by state law. If you move to another state, you need to write new documents that comply with state law. You want to make sure they're valid in the state you're in. If you get a divorce, you probably don't want your ex as your decision maker. If somebody close to you dies, you might have to change your will or change your decision maker. So do keep thinking about it. Do keep revisiting these periodically. So I think I've talked for a long time, and now I'm happy to take questions. So you have, yeah.
On the driving side, thanks. On the driving side, are you seeing insurance companies make any of those decisions for people, like raising rates after certain ages or denying coverage? Because I'm surprised that they wouldn't be.
Right. So if you have a certain number of accidents, they will raise rates. So insurers are a little bit active. Often, by the time you're elderly, you've been with the insurance company for decades, so they won't really deny coverage. But a lot of older people will say, "It's worth it to me. I'll pay another $100 or whatever dollars a year, and that's not that effective. Yeah. Yeah.
Really, on the last topic you were talking about, if people have advanced directives, living wills, and all that sort of thing, obviously, if you're from Ohio, they're good in Ohio. Are those kind of instruments also accepted in the other 49 states?
Yes, all 49 states have these type of documents, but you probably need to redo them because they have different technical requirements, different forms, and so on. So if you move to another state and you don't redo your will and your advance directives, they may accept it, but it's much better to just redo it to make sure everything is perfect.
I was thinking more of a snowbird.
Right.
Gone for 3 months.
Right. So it may not be a bad idea to have one for Florida and one for Ohio. But if you're just there temporarily, it's more likely that there won't be a problem. But this winter, nobody has to leave. It's like Florida here.
You mentioned provide funeral instructions, particularly to children. If you don't have children, who
To your
do you
siblings
suggest?
or whoever you think might bury you.
Well, I'll give that some thought.
Yeah, I thought the book was concise and comprehensive and well researched. I was wondering your comments on, I think a lot of people have low income, so what kind of steps for lower income people would you, some of the stuff you talked about in the book was kind of expensive, it seemed.
Right. So, lower income people, in some ways, they might have it easier because if you qualify for Medicaid, Medicaid will pay for long-term care. Long-term care is one of the most significant expenses in older age, and Medicare does not cover it. No insurance covers it except for long-term care insurance. And long-term care insurance is very, very expensive. And so a lot of people don't get it. A lot of financial advisors will tell you not to get it because you're better off investing your money and hoping it will grow, because you may not need long-term care, and if you invest thousands and thousands of dollars in an insurance policy, it will just get thrown away. So if you're going to qualify for Medicaid, you don't really have to worry about that because Medicaid does pay for long-term care. You have to be pretty poor. I think you can keep $2,000 or something like that in your home. But in some sense, that's a solution. Obviously, you're going to have more challenges saving for retirement, so you have to make sure you get good advice about how to go about saving for retirement. For example, if you have a choice between paying for children's college and saving for retirement, which should you do? All of the experts say save for retirement because your kids can get loans, or they can work, or they can go to a slightly less prestigious school. If you retire and you have no money, you don't have options. There are no federal loans for retirement. And then you'll be a burden to your children, and they won't appreciate that. So some people have to make very difficult choices. And yes, the expensive suggestions in the book are not for people of low income, but I have tried to address Medicaid and some of those other financial decisions that apply to people on all parts of the spectrum.
Could you explain the strategy for electronic data and passwords and all this? I think it becomes an increasingly difficult problem for family members, executors, and so on.
In what context, electronic data?
Well, for both dementia and for an executor who has a decedent.
So you're asking about how to remember passwords
Well,
or?
yeah, how to deal with websites and so on that don't want to let you in, that the passwords are lost. I mean,
I need that kind of advice.
Okay.
You want me to give that advice? So, I mean, one solution is to have people who take care of these things for you. So, there's a lot of advice about going to lawyers and having them take care of it, going to financial advisors and having them take care of it. I can't remember passwords and I lose them, but at least I have financial advisors who hopefully are keeping track of that kind of stuff. I had another thought that needs to come back. Oh, also there are, as I said, service professionals that can help you out. So daily money managers will write checks for you. If you trust them, you can give them the passwords and so on, and they will access your accounts for you. Geriatric care managers will help you deal with doctors. So if you have the money, getting assistance is well worth it, and there are professionals who can take a lot of the burden away. Go ahead.
Yes, great talk, great topic. Can you give a simplified version of the difference between a living will and a durable power of attorney for healthcare?
Sure. So a living will actually provides instructions and says, I will not want a ventilator. I will not want artificial nutrition and hydration if I can't eat anymore. But it only applies under very limited circumstances, only if you are terminally ill, permanently unconscious, or in a vegetative state. A durable power of attorney for health care appoints a decision maker who will make decisions for you no matter how healthy or unhealthy you are, so long as you can't make your own decisions. So if you have dementia or if you've had a traumatic brain injury, they will make decisions for you, and it might be for elective surgery, it might be for more serious things. But one provides instructions, one gives authority for another person to make decisions for you. In the durable power of attorney for healthcare, you can leave some instructions for your decision maker, but the important thing is that there is somebody who will make those decisions for you. So that is even more important than having a living will, because you may never be in a permanently unconscious state or whatever. But chances are that at some point, even if it's just the last few days of life, you will need somebody to make decisions for you. Does that clarify it?
Sounds like the living will is more serious towards the very end of your life.
Yeah,
Generally.
yeah, it's only in those very few circumstances. If you are terminally ill, permanently unconscious, or in a vegetative state, so the durable power of attorney is more important. The doctors will look to decision makers. There's some indication that they don't always respect the living will, especially if they don't agree with what you said. So having a decision maker is the most important thing.
But it's probably wisest to have both documents.
Have everything, the whole shebang. I think.
Yes. Perhaps from the other side of the spectrum, our elderly are living longer, and sometimes even mentally so. And there are organizations out there set up to protect the public and the elderly. What resources are available, if you're aware of legal services or support for people who are elderly that wish to fight to establish their right to maintain their independence?
Right. So there is legal aid here in Cleveland. You might call the Cleveland Bar Association and ask for various resources. I don't know who does work on a pro bono basis. The local law schools have clinics. I don't know if they do exactly this type of work, but calling the Cleveland Bar Association might be a good first step to see what kind of pro bono advocacy you might be able to get.
And that's been my experience. It is pro bono.
Right.
And legal aid is swamped.
Yes,
Thanks.
but some of the law firms may be willing to do a little bit of pro bono work, and there may be other advocacy organizations. Yeah. Brian, somebody has a mic, okay.
Yeah, a couple of things that I've seen over the last 10 years was we had a divorce where the wife challenged the competency of the husband. And there was a question of whether he would even have standing to actually file for the divorce. And there were significant assets that were involved here, and there was a hope to just kind of live them out in a way. So I think a lot of times in those durable power of attorneys, it would help if there's something in there about control over litigation and stuff to deal with that. And then the other thing about the Medicaid is there's always a lien that's going to be placed on any real estate that's, after you die, there's going to be a lien there. So even in those type of circumstances, getting somebody in there to deal with, maybe transferring those assets out so that there isn't any fraudulent transfer laws or anything like that comes up. Even in those in low-income situations, I think advice is needed.
Yes, absolutely. And having a durable attorney for property and finance will give you that decision maker, will give people authority in situations of litigation. And yes, even if you're going to be on Medicaid, there may be decisions that have to be made. So this certainly isn't advice only for wealthy people. You're right.
I was just going to add, now I'm thinking about the Medicaid issue. I mean, actually, if you have some money but not a lot of money, you want to think about Medicaid planning as early as you can. And then the other thing, going back to what this gentleman was saying, I know there's some other, I know the city of Cleveland, I think, has an ombudsman to deal with the aging issues, and maybe the counties. So there are resources for advocates.
Yeah, it's worth investigating. Other questions, stories, comments?
Just comment on the poor man in the wheelchair. A possible solution in that kind of situation is for the lawyer or the financial advisor to explain you have to have a list of all this stuff, all the list of your financial assets, all the list of the insurance policies, and the ones that people forget. If it's an accident, your credit cards will give you like $5,000. And then say, if you don't want to give it to me because of you're still private, Dad, give a copy to the lawyer, give a copy to the financial advisor. They have to keep it confidential, but if something happens to you, then we can find everything. And it's a pretty practical way to deal with that.
Right, I think actually this was a low-income family, and they didn't have a lawyer or financial advisor. He was trying to do it all himself, so very complicated situation. But yeah, if you can get the person to a lawyer or financial advisor, you're in much better shape.
My only point was just something learned through experience. If you have a client, parents, or yourself are a snowbird, be very careful when your primary residence is unoccupied for 30 days, because your homeowner's very likely is in jeopardy.
Your homeowner's insurance?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So make sure you have the proper riders, notify your agent. So many people just say, well, I can go to Florida for 3 months and leave my Ohio residence unoccupied, and I have coverage. You very well might not.
Yeah, that's a good point, and we encountered that after my parents died. You know, we wanted to get the house in shape and then sell it after it was in better shape, and it was almost impossible to find insurance that would allow us to to do it. I think my sister ended up having to say that she'll sleep there a few nights a week.
You have to, I mean, it's virtually impossible, and the coverage which you can get covers almost nothing.
So that's a very good point. If the house will be empty for a long period of time, you may run into insurance problems. So what do people do when they go to Florida for 4 months?
Most people ignore it because they don't know. And
What should they do?
you have to tell your agent.
But then they'll say it's canceled, no?
Better to know, because then you buy a rider, an unoccupied policy. There are insurance vehicles that may limit your coverage, but if you say nothing, that's when things get hinky. Likewise, you might tell your agent and they say fine because they don't know the difference. But once you told them and they didn't tell you anything different, you're good.
So you want to tell them by email so you have documentation, right?
If you don't write it down, it never happened.
What about a house sitter? Does that protect you?
I've never encountered that situation, so I can't say.
Does anybody know that? Yeah, house sitter.
But that's not an occupant. That's
I think they're okay with house sitters. They just don't want it unoccupied because there are hazards they're not happy about. Anything else? Okay. Thank you very much.